Snow had been falling over Denver since noon, and by the time Ethan Carter reached Union Station, the platforms were slick with a thin sheet of ice that caught the amber light of the overhead lamps. He was 31, broad-shouldered, with the kind of quiet, unhurried confidence that came from years of fixing things, engines, wiring, whatever broke. Tonight he wore a gray wool coat over a flannel shirt, his duffel bag slung over one shoulder, and his mind was set on one thing: getting home to Boulder before the storm shut down the last route out of the city. He'd been standing in line for nearly 20 minutes when he saw her. She was maybe 2 people ahead of him, tall, slender, dressed in a fitted navy coat that couldn't quite keep out the cold, her dark blonde, hair pulled back in a loose braid that had started to come undone at the ends. She kept checking her phone, then glancing up at the departure board, her jaw tightening every time the words "final boarding" flashed beside the 9:45 to Boulder. When she reached the counter, Ethan heard the clerk say the words that made her shoulders drop. "I'm sorry, ma'am. That was the last ticket. We're sold out for tonight." "Please," she said, her voice cracking just slightly. "My father is having surgery in the morning. I need to be there. Is there anything, any other train, any bus?" "Nothing running tonight, ma'am. Storms shut down the interstate, too." She stepped aside, pressing a gloved hand to her mouth, and Ethan watched her fight to keep herself composed. He didn't know her. He didn't know her anything. But something about the way she stood there, so contained, so determined not to fall apart in public, made him step out of line. "Ma'am," the clerk said to him next, "1 ticket left. Last one." Ethan looked at the woman standing a few feet away, then back at the clerk. "Give it to her," he said. The woman turned, startled. "What? No, I can't take your seat." "You need it more than I do," Ethan said simply. "I can catch a ride in the morning. You need to be with your father." She stared at him like she was trying to figure out if he was serious, if there was a catch. "Why would you do that? You don't know me." "I don't need to know you to know what it's like to almost miss saying goodbye to someone," Ethan said, and something flickered across her face. Recognition, maybe, or grief she wasn't ready to talk about. "Take the ticket, go." She hesitated one more second, then stepped forward and took it from the clerk's hand. "Thank you," she said, looking at Ethan like she wanted to say more but didn't have the words. "I'm Grace Whitfield." Ethan Carter. The station announcement crackled overhead. Final boarding call. Grace glanced toward the platform, then back at Ethan, torn. "You gave up the last ticket. Where are you going to go? It's nearly 10 at night, and the storm's getting worse." "I'll figure it out. Go, you'll miss it." But she didn't move. Instead, she pulled out her phone, typed something quickly, and looked up at him. "My parents' house is 20 minutes from here in Golden. My mother's expecting me to bring someone. She doesn't know. I was supposed to take the train alone tonight after my ride canceled. Please, let me at least get you somewhere warm. It's the least I can do." Ethan opened his mouth to refuse, but the wind cut through the station doors just then, sharp and biting, and he thought of the roads outside, already glazed with ice. "I don't want to intrude on your family." "You're not intruding. You're the reason. I get to see my father tomorrow." Her voice wavered on the last word. "Please." Something in her expression, stubborn, grateful, a little afraid, made him nod. They took a ride share together, the city lights blurring gold and white through the frosted windows. Grace was quiet for most of the ride, her hands folded tightly in her lap until she finally spoke. "My father had a heart attack 2 days ago. They're doing bypass surgery at 6 in the morning. I promised him I'd be there when he woke up." "You will be," Ethan said. "I'm glad the ticket went to someone who needed it that much." She glanced at him, studying his face in the dim light. "Most people wouldn't have given it up. Not for a stranger." "Most people didn't grow up the way I did," Ethan admitted. "My mom raised 3 of us alone after my dad left. There were nights strangers helped us more than family did. I guess I never forgot that." Grace's eyes softened, and for the first time since the station, she smiled, small but real. The house in Golden was a 2-story colonial with warm light, spilling from every window, wreaths still hanging from a Christmas that had passed weeks ago but hadn't yet been taken down. The moment they stepped inside, a woman in her late 50s rushed into the hallway, her face lined with worry and relief in equal measure. "Gracie, thank God." She stopped short when she saw Ethan. "Oh, I didn't realize you were bringing someone." "Mom, this is Ethan," Grace said quickly. "He gave up his train ticket so I could get here tonight. The trains were sold out, and he gave it to me." Grace's mother, Diane, looked at Ethan with an expression that shifted from confusion to something like disbelief. "You gave a complete stranger your ticket in this storm?" "It seemed like the right thing to do," Ethan said, suddenly self-conscious under her gaze. "Well, you can't possibly go back out in this," Diane said firmly, the kind of tone that clearly wasn't up for debate. "The roads are a mess, and every hotel in the area is probably booked because of the storm." "You'll stay here tonight." "I won't hear otherwise." Ethan tried to protest, but Diane was already ushering him toward the living room, calling over her shoulder for someone named Robert to make up the guest room. Grace caught Ethan's eye and gave an apologetic, amused shrug. "I told you, my mother doesn't take no for an answer." The house was warm and smelled of cinnamon and wood smoke, and within the hour Ethan found himself sitting at the kitchen table with Grace's younger brother, Sam, a college kid who peppered him with questions about the trains and the storm, while Diane moved between the stove and the counter, insisting on feeding him despite his protests that he wasn't hungry. "Eat," she said, setting a bowl of soup in front of him. "You gave up a train seat for my daughter. The least I can do is feed you." Over dinner, Ethan learned more about the family, that Grace's father, Robert Whitfield, had built a small furniture business from nothing, that Grace had moved back from Chicago 6 months ago to help manage it while he recovered from his first health scare, and that the surgery in the morning was the second and more serious one. Grace spoke about her father with a tenderness that made Ethan think of his own mother, of the quiet ways love showed itself in a family holding on to each other through hard times. Later that night, after Sam had gone up to bed and Diane had retreated to make calls to relatives, Grace found Ethan sitting alone on the back porch, watching the snow fall over the yard. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders as she stepped outside. "Too much on my mind, I guess," Ethan said. "Hope everything goes okay tomorrow." Grace sat down beside him, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "It will, it has to." She was quiet for a moment, then added, "I keep thinking about what you said earlier, about strangers helping you more than family did." Ethan looked down at his hands. "My dad left when I was 9. My mom worked 2 jobs to keep us fed. There was a neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, who used to leave groceries on our porch some weeks. Never said a word about it, never wanted credit. I think about her every time I have the chance to do something like that for someone else." "That's beautiful," Grace said softly. "And terrifying, growing up like that." "It made me who I am," Ethan said. "I don't regret it." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the snow gathering on the porch railing before Grace spoke again. "Thank you, not just for the ticket, for staying, for letting my family take care of you tonight. I know that's not easy, showing up in a stranger's house." "Your family's easy to be around," Ethan said. "You remind me a little of home." Grace smiled at that and something passed between them, unspoken, but understood. The next morning came early. Diane was up before dawn, brewing coffee and pacing the kitchen, and Grace dressed quickly, her earlier composure fraying at the edges as the hour of the surgery approached. Ethan offered to drive them to the hospital himself, since the roads had cleared enough overnight, and Diane accepted gratefully, too distracted with worry to argue. At the hospital, the family gathered in the waiting room, Diane clutching Sam's hand, Grace pacing near the window, Ethan standing quietly by the door, feeling like an outsider yet somehow woven into the fabric of their worry. 2 hours passed before the surgeon finally emerged, his expression giving nothing away until he spoke. "The surgery went well, better than we expected. He's going to need time to recover, but he's going to be fine." The room broke into quiet, tearful relief. Diane hugged Sam tightly, and Grace turned to Ethan, her eyes shining and without thinking. She reached out and hugged him too. "You did this," she whispered. "If you hadn't given me that ticket, I wouldn't have made it in time. I wouldn't have been here." "You would have found a way," Ethan said, "but I'm glad I could help." In the weeks that followed, Ethan found himself returning to Golden more than once, first to check on Robert as he recovered, then simply because Grace had begun texting him small updates about her father's progress, funny stories about Sam's college mishaps, questions about his work, his life, the town he'd grown up in. What started as gratitude slowly deepened into something neither of them had expected. By spring, Robert Whitfield was back on his feet, sharp-tongued and stubborn as ever, teasing Ethan mercilessly about the day he gave away a train ticket and gained a family Diane had taken to calling. Ethan, the boy who saved us, despite his repeated insistence that Grace would have, found another way. And Grace had stopped pretending that what she felt for Ethan was only gratitude. One evening in April, as cherry blossoms scattered across the Whitfields' backyard, Ethan found Grace sitting on the same porch where they'd first talked as strangers, turned into something more. "I keep thinking about that night," Grace said, watching the last of the sunset fade behind the mountains. "How different everything could have been if you hadn't stepped out of that line." "I think about it too," Ethan admitted, sitting beside her. "Best decision I ever made." Grace turned to him, her eyes searching his face. "Even though it meant spending the night in a stranger's house?" "Especially because of that," Ethan said, reaching for her hand. "I didn't just gain a place to stay that night. I gained you. I gained all of you." Grace leaned her head against his shoulder, and for a long moment, neither of them said anything at all, because nothing needed to be said. The last ticket had gone to her that snowy night in December, but somewhere along the way, without either of them realizing it. Ethan had found something far more lasting than a place to sleep. A family who had opened their door to a stranger, and a woman who had opened her heart to the man who gave up everything so she wouldn't miss saying goodbye.